Welcome to Sinister Memory. If you're new here, subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story. Let's get to today's story. The manuscript arrived at the Boston Historical Society on a bitter February morning in 1923, wrapped in oilcloth and bearing the musty scent of decades spent in forgotten archives. Professor William Henley, curator of colonial documents, would later describe the moment he first opened the leather-bound journal as one that fundamentally altered his understanding of documented history. The pages, yellowed with age and written in the careful script of Dr. Jonathan Pierce, bore witness to events that had transpired 80 years prior in the remote settlement of Millbrook, Massachusetts. Dr. Pierce had served as the town's physician during the harsh winter of 1843, a season that local records would later describe as unusually severe, with temperatures plummeting to levels that claimed livestock and forced families to burn furniture for warmth. His journal, discovered among the effects of his great-nephew following an estate sale, contained meticulous observations that extended far beyond medical practice. Pierce possessed the methodical mind of a man trained in both medicine and natural philosophy, qualities that rendered his account particularly compelling to scholars who would examine it decades later. The settlement of Millbrook itself had been established in 1798 by a group of Congregationalist families seeking to establish a community removed from the growing industrialization of Boston. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense pine forests, the town consisted of no more than 47 souls during the winter, Pierce documented. The isolation that had initially attracted its founders would prove to be both blessing and curse during the events that unfolded. According to Pierce's careful documentation, Helen Morgan arrived in Millbrook on February 3, 1843, during a snowstorm that had already deposited 3 feet of snow across the region. She came alone, traveling on foot from the direction of the old Indian trail that connected the settlement to the larger township of Greenfield, some 20 miles to the east. Her appearance was noted by several residents, though their descriptions, as recorded by Pierce, varied in curious ways that would later trouble historians attempting to verify the account. Mrs. Abigail Fletcher, the minister's wife, described Morgan as a woman of perhaps 30 years, tall and gaunt, with prematurely grey hair that she wore beneath a black woolen shawl. Thomas Brennan, the blacksmith, insisted she appeared younger, perhaps 25, and with dark hair and an unsettling intensity in her pale blue eyes. Most peculiar of all was the observation of young Timothy Walsh, aged 14, who claimed the woman's shadow seemed to precede her steps by several paces, a detail that Pierce initially dismissed as the fancy of an impressionable youth. Morgan sought lodging at the home of widow Sarah Hartley, a woman known for her charitable disposition toward travelers. The arrangement was not uncommon. Millbrook's isolation meant that visitors were rare, and Christian duty demanded hospitality be extended to those in need. Pierce noted that Morgan paid for her accommodation with silver coins of unusual design, bearing markings that the local minister C. Reverend Josiah Mills could not identify despite his considerable education in classical languages. From the beginning, Morgan's behavior established patterns that would soon disturb the community's tranquil routine. She spoke little, responding to questions with brief, courteous replies that revealed nothing of her origins or destination. She attended evening prayers at the small wooden church, but remained standing throughout the service, her lips moving silently in what appeared to be independent devotions. Most notably, she requested permission to use the kitchen after the household had retired, claiming she suffered from insomnia and found comfort in quiet domestic activities. It was during these nocturnal hours that the first peculiar observations emerged. Mrs. Hartley, awakened by soft sounds from below, discovered Morgan in the kitchen, carefully pouring salt in a perfect circle around herself as she knelt in silent contemplation. When questioned the following morning, Morgan explained that the practice was a form of meditation, taught to her by the sisters of a convent where she had briefly resided. The explanation satisfied Mrs. Hartley's curiosity, though she noted in her own diary, which Pierce would later examine, that the salt circle appeared to have been drawn with mathematical precision. Pierce's medical training had taught him to observe human behavior with scientific detachment, yet he found himself increasingly intrigued by the stranger's presence in their small community. His journal entries from this period reflect a growing awareness that Morgan's arrival coincided with subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Sleep disturbances became common among the residents, with several families reporting unusually vivid dreams that left them feeling exhausted upon waking. The physician's methodical nature compelled him to document these phenomena with the same rigor he applied to recording symptoms of physical ailments, creating a record that would challenge conventional understanding of the events that followed. Dr. Pierce's fascination with Helen Morgan's nocturnal activities intensified during her second week in Millbrook. His medical practice had afforded him numerous opportunities to observe human behavior under stress, yet Morgan's conduct defied conventional explanation. The physician began maintaining detailed records of her evening routines, noting discrepancies that would have escaped less trained observation. Each night, precisely at the stroke of 11, Morgan would descend to the Hartley kitchen. Pierce had positioned himself in the adjacent parlor on several occasions, concealed behind heavy curtains that allowed him to observe without detection. The woman's movements possessed an almost ceremonial quality, each gesture deliberate and measured. She would first clear the wooden table of any remaining items, wiping its surface with a damp cloth until no trace of the day's activities remained. The salt she employed came from her own provisions, stored in a leather pouch that she kept secured within her traveling bag. Pierce noted that the crystals appeared unusually fine and white, unlike the coarser grey salt commonly used in Millbrook households. Morgan would pour the substance directly from her palm, creating a circle approximately 6 feet in diameter with mathematical precision that suggested considerable practice. The physician's attempts to measure the circle the following mornings consistently yielded identical dimensions, a consistency that troubled his scientific sensibilities. Within this salt boundary, Morgan would kneel facing east, her posture erect and her hands folded in her lap. Her lips moved continuously, though Pierce could discern no audible words despite his proximity. The duration of these sessions varied, ranging from 30 minutes to nearly 2 hours, with no apparent pattern that the physician could identify. Most peculiar was Morgan's method of concluding the ritual. She would rise slowly, gather every grain of salt with meticulous care, and return it to her leather pouch before retiring to her chamber. Mrs. Hartley had initially expressed concern about the salt's effect on her wooden floors, but examination revealed no damage or discoloration. Indeed, the areas where Morgan performed her nightly ritual appeared to gleam with unusual luster, as though the wood had been polished to an extraordinary degree. This phenomenon extended beyond the immediate circle, with the entire kitchen exhibiting an inexplicable cleanliness that persisted despite the household's daily activities. The widow's own behavior began to reflect subtle changes during Morgan's residency. Pierce observed that Mrs. Hartley, previously known for her restless energy and constant domestic activity, had become increasingly contemplative. She spent long periods gazing from her windows toward the surrounding forest, her expression distant and thoughtful. When questioned about her guests' unusual habits, the widow displayed an uncharacteristic reluctance to discuss the matter, offering only vague assurances that Morgan was a devout woman seeking spiritual solace. Pierce's medical rounds during this period revealed a curious pattern among Millbrook's residents. Sleep disturbances, initially attributed to the harsh winter conditions, had evolved into something more complex. Patients reported dreams of extraordinary vividness, often featuring imagery that bore no relation to their daily experiences. Mrs. Rebecca Foster described recurring visions of vast libraries filled with books written in unknown languages. The blacksmith, Thomas Brennan, spoke of dreams in which he forged implements of impossible complexity using metals that gleamed like starlight. Most disturbing were the reports from the settlement's children. Young Timothy Walsh continued to insist that shadows behaved strangely in Morgan's presence, moving independently of their sources. His sister, Mary, claimed that birds fell silent whenever the mysterious woman passed beneath the trees during her daily walks. Pierce initially dismissed these observations as childish imagination, yet his scientific training compelled him to document them with the same rigor he applied to adult testimonies. The physician's own sleep had become increasingly troubled. His dreams carried him to places he had never visited, landscapes of impossible beauty and terrible isolation. He found himself walking through corridors of black stone, their walls carved with symbols that seemed familiar, yet remained beyond his comprehension. Upon waking, Pierce discovered that his hands bore faint impressions, as though he had been grasping objects that existed only in his sleeping mind. Temperature readings throughout the settlement revealed another anomaly. Despite the severe winter conditions, the area immediately surrounding the Hartley residence maintained temperatures several degrees warmer than neighboring properties. Pierce's thermometer, a precision instrument acquired during his medical training in Boston, consistently recorded these variations. The phenomenon appeared to center on the kitchen where Morgan conducted her nightly rituals, radiating outward in a pattern that defied meteorological explanation. By February's end, Pierce had accumulated extensive documentation of these occurrences, yet their significance remained elusive. His rational mind sought conventional explanations, while his growing unease suggested forces beyond scientific understanding. The physician found himself anticipating each evening's observations with a mixture of scholarly curiosity and inexplicable dread. Dr. Pierce's growing unease regarding Helen Morgan's presence in Millbrook compelled him to investigate her claimed religious background. The woman had mentioned residing briefly at a convent, though she had provided no specific details about its location or order. Pierce's correspondence with ecclesiastical authorities in Boston and the surrounding regions yielded disturbing results that would fundamentally alter his perception of their mysterious guest. Father Michael O'Brien of St. Mary's Cathedral in Boston responded to Pierce's inquiry with particular interest. The priest had served in various capacities throughout New England for over 3 decades and maintained extensive records of religious communities in the region. His letter, dated March 2, 1843, contained information that Pierce would later describe as profoundly unsettling. No convent within 200 miles of Millbrook had any record of a woman matching Morgan's description. More troubling still, several religious communities reported recent disturbances that coincided with Morgan's arrival in their settlement. The Sisters of Mercy in Worcester had experienced what their Mother Superior described as a period of spiritual unrest during late January. Novices reported shared dreams of a woman in black robes who walked among them during their sleep, her face obscured by shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The dreams had ceased abruptly on February 3rd, the precise date of Morgan's appearance in Millbrook. Similar accounts emerged from convents in Springfield and Hartford, each describing a brief period of nocturnal disturbances that ended with mysterious suddenness. Pierce's medical training had taught him to approach unusual phenomena with skeptical analysis, yet the consistency of these reports defied rational explanation. His correspondence with Dr. Elias Whitfield, a colleague from his Boston medical school days who now served as physician to several religious communities, provided additional disturbing details. Whitfield reported that nuns experiencing these shared dreams exhibited physical symptoms that persisted beyond waking. faint marks on their palms resembling burns, though no source of heat could be identified, and a peculiar sensitivity to salt that caused their skin to redden upon contact. The physician's investigation into Morgan's background revealed additional anomalies that challenged conventional understanding. The silver coins she had used to pay for lodging bore markings that, according to a numismatist consulted by Pierce, did not correspond to any known currency. The symbols etched into the metal appeared to be of considerable antiquity, yet the coins themselves showed no signs of age or wear. Most peculiar was the metal's composition, which analysis revealed to contain trace elements not typically found in North American silver deposits. Morgan's daily routine in Millbrook had established patterns that further troubled Pierce's scientific sensibilities. She consumed remarkably little food, subsisting primarily on bread and water, yet showed no signs of malnutrition or physical decline. Her walks through the settlement followed precise routes that formed geometric patterns when mapped, though she appeared to navigate these paths unconsciously. The physician's careful documentation revealed that these routes consistently avoided certain areas of the town, particularly the small cemetery where Millbrook's earliest settlers lay buried. The woman's interaction with the natural environment produced effects that defied conventional explanation. Plants in the Hartley household had begun to exhibit unusual growth patterns, their leaves turning toward Morgan's presence regardless of available sunlight. Mrs. Hartley's herb garden, typically dormant during winter months, showed signs of premature sprouting in areas where Morgan had walked. Most disturbing was the behavior of local wildlife, which had begun to gather near the Hartley residence in unprecedented numbers. Crows, typically solitary during winter, assembled in groups of precisely 13, perching silently on the roof and surrounding trees. Pierce's own health had begun to deteriorate in ways that concerned his medical judgment. Sleep provided no rest, as his dreams carried him to increasingly vivid and disturbing landscapes. He found himself walking through vast underground chambers where robed figures moved in silent procession, their faces hidden beneath hoods that seemed to absorb light rather than merely casting shadows. Upon waking, Pierce discovered that his medical instruments had been rearranged in patterns he could not remember creating, though he lived alone and kept his study securely locked. The physician's attempts to engage Morgan in conversation about her religious background met with responses that were courteous yet evasive. She spoke of spiritual practices learned during her travels, mentioning techniques of meditation and purification that she claimed were common among certain contemplative orders. Yet her knowledge of conventional Catholic doctrine appeared limited, and she displayed an unusual familiarity with texts and practices that Pierce recognized as belonging to much older traditions. Temperature anomalies around the Hartley residence had intensified, creating a microclimate that attracted the attention of neighboring farmers. Snow melted in perfect circles around the property, leaving patches of exposed earth that remained unfrozen despite the continuing harsh weather. These areas exhibited an unusual fertility, with grass growing in geometric patterns that suggested deliberate cultivation rather than natural occurrence. The first incident occurred on the night of March 7th, when Mrs. Rebecca Foster was discovered by her husband standing barefoot in her nightgown beside the frozen creek that bordered their property. She had no memory of leaving her bed, yet her feet bore no signs of frostbite despite the sub-zero temperatures and her prolonged exposure to the elements. When questioned by Dr. Pierce the following morning, Mrs. Foster described a compulsive urge to walk toward what she perceived as a distant light, though her husband had observed no illumination in the direction she had traveled. Within a week, similar incidents plagued half the households in Millbrook. The afflicted invariably left their homes during the deepest hours of night, moving with purposeful determination toward locations they could not later identify. Pierce documented each case with meticulous care, noting that the sleepwalkers exhibited no awareness of their surroundings, yet navigated obstacles with supernatural precision. Most disturbing was their consistent destination. Each person was found within a quarter-mile radius of the Hartley residence, arranged in positions that formed geometric patterns when viewed from above. Young Timothy Walsh provided the most detailed account of the phenomenon, having retained partial consciousness during his nocturnal wandering. The boy described feeling drawn by an irresistible force that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. His feet had moved without conscious direction, carrying him through the forest along paths he had never seen in daylight. Most unsettling was his description of other figures moving through the darkness, their forms barely visible, yet unmistakably human, all converging toward the same mysterious destination. Pierce's investigation revealed that the sleepwalking episodes coincided precisely with Helen Morgan's nightly salt circles. His careful timing established that the afflicted began their unconscious journeys within minutes of Morgan's ritual commencement, returning to awareness only after she had completed her mysterious ceremony. The physician's attempts to wake the sleepwalkers during their episodes proved futile. They remained unresponsive to physical contact or verbal commands, their eyes open, yet focused on something beyond ordinary perception. The salt Morgan employed in her rituals had begun to exhibit properties that challenged Pierce's understanding of natural substances. Samples collected from the kitchen floor after her ceremonies showed unusual crystalline structures when examined under his microscope. The grains appeared to pulse with faint luminescence, a phenomenon that intensified during the hours when sleepwalking incidents occurred. Most peculiar was the salt's behavior when exposed to flame. Rather than dissolving or crackling as expected, it produced a steady blue light that cast no shadows. Mrs. Hartley's condition had deteriorated markedly since the sleepwalking epidemic began. The widow spent increasing amounts of time in a trance-like state, her gaze fixed on empty spaces, as though observing invisible activities. Pierce noted that her pulse remained steady during these episodes, yet her breathing became so shallow as to be nearly imperceptible. When consciousness returned, she displayed no memory of the lost time, though she often remarked upon vivid dreams of walking through vast underground chambers filled with the sound of distant chanting. The physician's own resistance to the phenomenon had begun to weaken. He found himself experiencing moments of disorientation during his evening observations, losing track of time as he watched Morgan perform her rituals. On several occasions, Pierce discovered himself standing in his nightclothes beside his bedroom window with no memory of rising from bed. His journal entries from this period became increasingly erratic, filled with sketches of symbols he could not remember drawing and descriptions of places he had never visited. Temperature readings throughout Millbrook revealed a disturbing pattern. The warming effect previously confined to the Hartley residence had begun to spread, creating a network of heated zones that corresponded precisely to the locations where sleepwalkers had been discovered. These areas remained snow-free despite continued precipitation, their exposed earth showing signs of unusual mineral deposits that gleamed with metallic luster under moonlight. Local wildlife had responded to these changes with behaviors that defied natural explanation. The crows that gathered around the Hartley residence had increased in number, their assemblies now exceeding 50 birds that maintained absolute silence during Morgan's nightly ceremonies. More disturbing was the appearance of animals typically dormant during winter months. Bats emerged from hibernation to circle the settlement in precise formations, while insects unknown to the region appeared in the warmed zones, their bodies exhibiting iridescent coloration that seemed to shift in response to Morgan's activities. Pierce's correspondence with medical colleagues in distant cities revealed that similar phenomena had been reported in other isolated communities, always in connection with the arrival of mysterious travelers. Dr. Harrison Mills of Providence described a case involving a woman who had appeared during a harsh winter, bringing with her an epidemic of shared dreams and unexplained nocturnal wandering. The incidents had ceased abruptly with the woman's departure, leaving no trace of her presence except for geometric patterns burned into the earth where she had conducted nightly rituals. The physician's growing realization that Morgan represented something beyond conventional understanding filled him with a dread that permeated his waking hours and haunted his increasingly troubled sleep. Dr. Pierce's investigation into Helen Morgan's background led him to the private library of Professor Augustus Fairfax, a scholar of antiquarian texts at Harvard University. Fairfax had spent decades collecting manuscripts that documented unusual phenomena throughout New England's colonial history, and his correspondence with Pierce revealed disturbing parallels to the events unfolding in Millbrook. Among the professor's collection was a leather-bound journal written in Latin by Father Ignatius Brennan, a Jesuit missionary who had encountered similar occurrences in the wilderness settlements of western Massachusetts during the winter of 1789. Father Brennan's account described the arrival of a woman who claimed to be a displaced nun seeking sanctuary during a particularly harsh winter. The missionary had noted her unusual devotional practices, which involved the creation of salt circles and prolonged periods of silent meditation that seemed to affect the spiritual atmosphere of the entire settlement. Most troubling were Brennan's observations of the woman's influence on the local population, who began experiencing shared visions and compulsive nocturnal wandering that defied religious explanation. The Jesuits' theological training had led him to consult texts that predated Christian doctrine, seeking understanding of phenomena that conventional religious scholarship could not address. His research had uncovered references to ancient practices involving salt purification rituals and geometric patterns that were believed to facilitate communication with entities existing beyond ordinary perception. Brennan's journal contained detailed sketches of symbols he had observed the mysterious woman creating within her salt circles, symbols that bore striking resemblance to those Pierce had begun unconsciously drawing in his own notes. Professor Fairfax's analysis of these historical parallels revealed a pattern that extended far beyond isolated incidents. His collection contained accounts from settlements across New England, each describing the appearance of solitary women during harsh winters, their presence invariably accompanied by unexplained phenomena that challenged both scientific and religious understanding. The consistency of these reports, spanning nearly a century, suggested something more systematic than random occurrences. The professor's most disturbing discovery was a manuscript fragment written in an unknown language, discovered among the papers of a colonial administrator who had investigated several such incidents during the 1750s. The text had been partially translated by a scholar of ancient languages, revealing references to individuals who served as conduits between different planes of existence. These beings, according to the fragmentary translation, appeared during periods of extreme isolation and hardship, their presence facilitating transformations that prepared communities for purposes beyond human comprehension. Pierce's examination of the translated passages revealed terminology that resonated with his observations of Morgan's activities. The text described rituals involving crystalline substances that created barriers between different states of reality, allowing practitioners to maintain their essential nature while existing in foreign environments. Most unsettling were references to the gradual preparation of human consciousness for contact with intelligences that operated according to principles fundamentally different from earthly existence. The physician's own condition had deteriorated significantly during his research into these historical precedents. His sleep had become a torment of vivid experiences that felt more real than his waking hours. he found himself walking through vast underground complexes where robed figures conducted ceremonies around geometric patterns carved into floors of black stone. The air in these dream spaces carried the scent of salt and something else, something organic yet indefinable, that left him feeling nauseated upon waking. Morgan's influence on Millbrook had intensified during Pierce's absence for research. Mrs. Hartley's letters described an escalation in the sleepwalking incidents, with entire families now participating in the nocturnal gatherings around her residence. The widow reported that the affected individuals displayed increasing coordination in their movements, as though responding to unheard instructions that guided their unconscious actions towards specific purposes. Most disturbing was Hartley's description of changes in the physical environment surrounding her home. The geometric patterns in the earth had become more pronounced, forming intricate designs that seemed to pulse with faint luminescence during the darkest hours of night. The salt circles Morgan created in the kitchen had begun to leave permanent impressions in the wooden floor, their boundaries marked by subtle discoloration that persisted despite repeated cleaning attempts. The temperature anomalies had expanded beyond the immediate vicinity of the Hartley residence, creating a network of warmed zones throughout Millbrook that corresponded to locations where sleepwalkers had gathered. These areas showed signs of geological transformation, with the soil taking on a crystalline quality that reflected moonlight in patterns that hurt the eyes to observe directly. Pierce's return to Millbrook on March 15th revealed a community transformed by forces that his research had only begun to illuminate. Dr. Pierce's return to Millbrook revealed a settlement that bore little resemblance to the community he had left 2 weeks prior. The snow that had blanketed the region throughout the harsh winter had melted in geometric patterns, creating a network of exposed earth that formed intricate designs visible from the elevated approach to the town. These patterns extended far beyond the immediate vicinity of the Hartley residence, encompassing the entire settlement in a complex mandala of interconnected circles and angular pathways that defied natural explanation. The residents Pierce encountered displayed a disturbing uniformity in their behavior that immediately captured his medical attention. Their movements had acquired a synchronized quality, as though responding to shared rhythms imperceptible to outside observation. Conversations ceased abruptly when he approached, replaced by polite smiles that failed to reach their eyes. Most unsettling was their collective tendency to pause in their activities at precise intervals, their gazes turning simultaneously toward the Hartley residence as though receiving silent communications. Mrs. Hartley's physical appearance had undergone changes that alarmed Pierce's professional sensibilities. The widow had lost considerable weight, her skin taking on a translucent quality that revealed the network of veins beneath. Her eyes had developed an unusual luminosity, particularly noticeable in dim lighting, while her hair had turned completely white despite her relatively young age. Yet she moved with an energy and grace that seemed to contradict her apparent physical decline, her steps following the geometric patterns carved into the earth with unconscious precision. The Hartley residence itself had been transformed in ways that challenged architectural understanding. The interior walls displayed symbols that appeared to have been burned into the wood rather than carved or painted. These markings pulsed with faint phosphorescence during evening hours, creating a network of interconnected designs that extended throughout the structure. Most disturbing was the kitchen, where Morgan's nightly salt circles had left permanent impressions that seemed to extend below the floor's surface, as though the rituals had affected the very foundation of the building. Pierce's attempts to examine Morgan directly met with curious resistance. The woman appeared to anticipate his presence, positioning herself in locations that made close observation impossible while maintaining the pretense of normal domestic activity. When their paths did cross, Pierce experienced disorientation that left him unable to focus on her features for extended periods. His medical instruments behaved erratically in her vicinity, with his thermometer registering temperatures that fluctuated wildly, and his pocket watch losing time in ways that defied mechanical explanation. The sleepwalking epidemic had evolved into something far more organized than Pierce's previous observations had suggested. The affected residents no longer wandered aimlessly, but moved with coordinated purpose, their nocturnal gatherings forming elaborate processions that traced the geometric patterns carved into the earth. Pierce's covert observation revealed that these assemblies followed precise choreography, with participants maintaining exact distances and timing that suggested extensive rehearsal, though none retained conscious memory of their activities. Most disturbing was the discovery that the geometric patterns extended far beyond Millbrook's boundaries. Pierce's exploration of the surrounding forest revealed similar markings carved into clearings and rock formations, creating a vast network that encompassed several square miles. These designs appeared to be of considerable antiquity, yet they showed signs of recent maintenance, as though Morgan's presence had reactivated dormant elements of an ancient system. The local wildlife had undergone transformations that defied natural explanation. The crows that gathered around the settlement had developed unusual coloration, their black feathers now bearing iridescent patterns that shifted in response to Morgan's activities. More troubling was the appearance of creatures that Pierce could not identify, beings that moved through the shadows at the periphery of vision, yet vanished when observed directly. Their presence was marked only by tracks in the earth that formed geometric patterns, consistent with the larger design encompassing the settlement. Pierce's own resistance to the phenomenon had begun to crumble under the weight of constant exposure. His dreams had become indistinguishable from waking experience, filled with visions of vast underground chambers where robed figures conducted ceremonies around pools of luminescent liquid. Upon waking, he discovered that his hands bore the scent of salt and something else, something organic that reminded him of deep earth and ancient stone. The physician's journal entries from this period reflected his growing realization that Morgan's presence in Millbrook represented something far more significant than an isolated supernatural occurrence. The evidence suggested a systematic transformation of the community, a preparation for purposes that extended beyond human understanding and challenged the very foundations of reality as he had previously conceived it. The night of March 21st marked the spring equinox, and Dr. Pierce observed preparations throughout Millbrook that suggested the residents anticipated an event of extraordinary significance. The geometric patterns carved into the earth had begun to emit a faint luminescence visible even during daylight hours, while the temperature anomalies had intensified to create microclimates that defied the season's natural progression. Most disturbing was the behavior of the settlement's inhabitants, who moved with synchronized precision that indicated coordination beyond conscious awareness. Pierce positioned himself in the forest overlooking the settlement, his medical training compelling him to document what his rational mind struggled to accept. As darkness fell, the residents emerged from their homes in perfect unison, their movements following the carved pathways with mechanical precision. Men, women, and children walked barefoot despite the cold, their faces displaying expressions of serene concentration that suggested profound spiritual experience rather than mere sleepwalking. Helen Morgan appeared at the center of this nocturnal procession, her black robes flowing as though moved by winds that affected no other objects. The salt she carried gleamed with internal light, casting shadows that moved independently of her physical form. Pierce noted that her feet did not quite touch the ground as she walked, hovering perhaps an inch above the earth in defiance of natural law. Most unsettling was the realization that her face had become difficult to perceive directly, as though surrounded by a distortion that bent light away from her features. The convergence took place in the clearing where Pierce had first discovered the ancient geometric patterns. The residents arranged themselves according to the carved designs, their positions forming a living mandala that pulsed with the rhythm of synchronized breathing. Morgan took her place at the center, beginning her salt circle ritual on a scale that dwarfed her previous ceremonies. The crystalline substance poured from her hands in quantities that exceeded what her small pouch could possibly contain, creating concentric circles that extended outward to encompass the entire assembly. As Morgan's ritual intensified, the air itself began to shimmer with energy that made Pierce's skin crawl with static electricity. The geometric patterns carved into the earth responded to her activities, glowing with increasing brightness that transformed the forest clearing into a cathedral of living light. The assembled residents swayed in unison, their movements creating harmonics that resonated through the ground and into Pierce's bones, filling him with a dread that transcended rational fear. The physician's instruments registered phenomena that challenged scientific understanding. His compass spun wildly before settling on directions that corresponded to no earthly magnetic field. The thermometer recorded temperatures that fluctuated between extremes, while his pocket watch stopped entirely, its hands frozen at positions that formed geometric angles consistent with the patterns surrounding him. Most disturbing was his medical bag, which had become impossibly heavy, as though its contents had acquired mass that defied physical law. Through his telescope, Pierce observed changes in Morgan's appearance that confirmed his growing suspicions about her true nature. Her form seemed to shift between states of solidity and translucence, occasionally revealing glimpses of something vast and incomprehensible that existed within or behind her human facade. The salt circles she created had begun to extend vertically as well as horizontally, forming geometric structures in three-dimensional space that hurt the mind to contemplate directly. The residents' participation in the ceremony had evolved beyond mere physical presence. Pierce observed streams of luminous energy flowing between their bodies and the geometric patterns, creating a network of connections that pulsed with increasing intensity. Their faces displayed expressions of transcendent joy mixed with terror, as though experiencing revelations that exceeded human capacity for comprehension. Most troubling was the gradual transparency that began to affect their physical forms, as though their participation in Morgan's ritual was transforming their essential nature. The forest itself responded to the ceremony with changes that defied natural explanation. Trees bent toward the clearing despite the absence of wind, their branches forming geometric patterns that mirrored the designs carved into the earth. The very air seemed to thicken, taking on a quality that made breathing difficult while simultaneously filling Pierce with energy that bordered on euphoria. Sounds from the ceremony reached him across impossible distances, whispers in languages that predated human speech, yet somehow conveyed meaning that bypassed rational understanding. As the ritual reached its crescendo, Pierce realized that his role as observer had become untenable. The forces Morgan had unleashed were drawing him inexorably toward participation, his scientific detachment crumbling under the weight of revelations that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. His final coherent observation noted that the geometric patterns had begun to extend beyond the physical realm, creating doorways to spaces that existed outside conventional dimensions. The physician's journal entry for March 21st ended abruptly, the ink trailing off mid-sentence, as though his hand had been guided away from documentation toward purposes that transcended human record-keeping. The final entry in Dr. Pierce's journal, dated March 22nd, 1843, consisted of a single line written in handwriting that bore little resemblance to his previous meticulous script. "They have shown me the spaces between the stars." The remainder of the page contained geometric symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly, their meaning hovering at the edge of comprehension before dissolving into incomprehensible abstraction. Professor Henley's investigation into the fate of Millbrook revealed a mystery that would haunt New England historical records for decades to come. Official documents from the Massachusetts colonial administration indicated that the settlement simply ceased to exist after March 21st, 1843. Supply wagons sent from Greenfield found empty buildings arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their interiors showing no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Personal belongings remained undisturbed. Meals sat half-finished on tables, yet no trace of the 47 residents could be found. The search parties that combed the surrounding forest discovered the geometric patterns carved into clearings and rock formations, though these designs appeared far more ancient than the settlement itself. Most disturbing were the areas where the earth had been transformed into a crystalline substance that reflected light in ways that caused severe disorientation among the searchers. Several men reported experiencing vivid hallucinations when exposed to these formations for extended periods, visions of vast underground chambers and robed figures that felt more real than their waking surroundings. Dr. Pierce's medical bag was found in the forest clearing where the final ceremony had taken place, its contents arranged in geometric patterns that mirrored the designs carved into the earth. His instruments had been transformed in ways that defied explanation. The thermometer's mercury had crystallized into formations that resembled salt, while his pocket watch had stopped at a time that corresponded to no earthly measurement. Most peculiar was his stethoscope, which had somehow become fused with crystalline growths that emerged from the earth itself. The Hartley residence stood empty like the other buildings, yet it showed signs of transformation that set it apart from the rest of the settlement. The salt circles Morgan had created in the kitchen had burned completely through the wooden floor, revealing geometric patterns carved into the stone foundation that appeared to extend deep into the earth. The walls bore symbols that seemed to move when observed peripherally, their phosphorescent glow visible even in daylight. Most unsettling was the discovery that the building's interior dimensions no longer corresponded to its external structure, as though space itself had been altered by the rituals conducted within. Subsequent investigations by colonial authorities yielded increasingly disturbing evidence of the events that had transpired in Millbrook. Neighboring settlements reported strange lights in the sky during the night of March 21st, accompanied by sounds that resembled chanting in languages that predated human speech. Several witnesses described seeing figures moving through the forest in geometric formations, their forms translucent yet unmistakably human. These sightings ceased abruptly at dawn, leaving no physical evidence except for the geometric patterns that continued to appear in clearings throughout the region. The fate of Helen Morgan remained the most enigmatic aspect of the entire affair. No trace of her presence could be found among the abandoned buildings, yet her influence permeated every aspect of the transformed settlement. The leather pouch that had contained her salt was discovered in the kitchen, empty, yet somehow heavier than when full. Analysis of residue found within revealed crystalline structures that defied classification, their composition including elements that existed nowhere in the natural world. Professor Henley's research into similar incidents throughout New England's history revealed a pattern that suggested the Millbrook disappearance was part of a larger phenomenon spanning centuries. Colonial records contained references to settlements that had vanished under similar circumstances, always during harsh winters and always in connection with the arrival of mysterious women who conducted unusual religious practices. These incidents occurred at regular intervals, suggesting a systematic process rather than random supernatural events. The geometric patterns discovered throughout the Millbrook region continued to exhibit unusual properties long after the settlement's abandonment. Travelers reported experiencing disorientation and vivid dreams when camping near these formations, while local wildlife avoided the areas entirely. Most disturbing were the accounts of individuals who claimed to hear faint chanting emanating from the earth itself during the darkest hours of night. Sounds that seemed to originate from vast depths beneath the crystalline formations. Dr. Pierce's journal, when examined by experts in ancient languages, contained symbols that appeared in texts predating known civilization. The final pages suggested that the physician had gained understanding of forces that operated according to principles fundamentally alien to human comprehension. His transformation from scientific observer to willing participant in phenomena beyond rational explanation served as a warning about the dangers of investigating mysteries that were never meant for human understanding. The silence that settled over the former site of Millbrook carried implications that extended far beyond the disappearance of a single settlement, suggesting transformations that challenged the very nature of reality itself. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sinister Memory. If you enjoyed today's investigation, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to be alerted when we unveil our next dark chronicle. Share your thoughts about this case in the comments below. We read every single one, and your ideas often lead us to our next investigation. Until next time.